This is the story of the 3 days she did not come back. For 3 days, they left her out there. No water, no radio, a shattered scope, and a wound running from her shoulder down to her ribs that she had packed with strips torn from her own uniform sleeve. When she walked back through the gate on the fourth morning, what she was dragging behind her silenced an entire forward operating base. Stay with me until the very end, because what she does in the final 90 seconds is the reason 43 Special Operations commanders now train their snipers differently. The base sat inside a bowl of red rock and yellow dust, 60 miles from the nearest paved road and 180 miles from anything you could call a city. There were 340 personnel stationed there, Marines, a small contingent of Army Rangers on rotation, a handful of Air Force ground crew, and a special detachment of Navy operators whose exact designation was not printed on any door. Everyone knew each other. Everyone knew each other's call signs, each other's habits, each other's weaknesses. When she arrived, that entire ecosystem cracked and reformed around her presence like water going around a stone. She did not fit any of the categories. She was not Rangers. She was not Marines. She was not Air Force. And the SEAL detachment, which had watched her from a distance the entire first week without ever approaching her, would only say 2 words when pressed about her origin. Not ours. That was all. Not ours. Which of course meant, to everyone else on the base, that she was even more of a mystery. Master Chief Delacroix had been the one who noticed the tattoo first. It happened by accident, during a fire drill on the 5th morning, when the wind pulled her neck gaiter down for just half a second as she was jogging toward the muster point. He had been standing near the flagpole with a coffee in his hand, watching the personnel line up, and his eye had caught on the faint dark ink just below the angle of her jaw. He had not said a word. He had watched her pull the gaiter back up. He had watched her fall into formation. And after the drill was over, he had walked directly to the commander's office and closed the door behind him. What he told Harlan inside that office was never repeated. But when Delacroix walked out, his face was a color that Harlan's executive officer had never seen it before. Ashy, almost gray. He walked past the officer without acknowledging her and went straight to the SEAL detachment's quarters, and for the next 6 hours, the door to that building did not open once. Meanwhile, Corporal Reyes was in the mess kitchen, wearing a plastic apron over her uniform, peeling potatoes for the evening meal. She had been given the task by Voss with a smirk that morning. She had taken the peeler without a word. She had been peeling for 4 hours straight, moving with the same slow, deliberate economy of motion she brought to everything else, and the pile of clean potatoes beside her had grown into a small mountain. When Voss walked past the kitchen window and saw her still there, still peeling, he laughed loud enough for 2 of his corporals to laugh with him. He said something about how the base finally had a proper cook. His corporals laughed harder. She did not lift her head. She did not adjust her grip on the peeler. She peeled the next potato in exactly 7 seconds, dropped it in the water, and reached for another. And in the SEAL detachment building on the other side of the base, Master Chief Delacroix was on a secure line to a number that only existed in 3 locations in the entire country, and the voice on the other end was saying a word to him that he had not heard spoken aloud in over a decade. It happened on the 9th morning, in front of everyone. The base was doing its weekly all-hands assembly on the parade ground, a formation of nearly 300 personnel arranged in neat rectangles by unit, and Commander Harlan was walking the front rank when Sergeant Voss decided he was going to make a point. He stepped forward as Harlan approached his section. He snapped a salute, and then, in a voice loud enough to carry across the entire formation, he requested permission to speak. Harlan gave it. Voss then turned, pointed to Corporal Reyes standing at the far end of his rank, and said that with the commander's permission, he would like to formally request that Corporal Reyes be reassigned to a non-combatant support role permanently. He said she was not a soldier. He said she had not passed any qualification anyone on the base had witnessed. He said she was slowing down his rotation schedule. And then he said, with a small smile, that if she wanted to prove otherwise, she was welcome to come out to the range that afternoon and shoot alongside real operators. The parade ground went very quiet. Marines 2 ranks back turned their heads to look at Reyes. Rangers pretended not to. The Air Force detachment stared at their own boots. And at the far end of the formation, near the flagpole, Master Chief Delacroix, who had not spoken to anyone since his phone call 4 days earlier, went absolutely still. Commander Harlan turned to look at Reyes. She was standing at parade rest, spine straight, chin level, eyes fixed on the horizon behind Harlan's shoulder. She had not moved a single muscle. Her breathing had not changed. She looked exactly the same as she had looked every other minute of every other day since she had arrived on that base. Harlan hesitated. He hesitated for a long moment. And then, because he was a man who believed that a good commander did not intervene in disputes between his personnel, because he was a man who had already made up his mind that this quiet corporal was not what her file suggested she was, because he was tired of the yellow sticker in the bottom drawer of his desk, and the phone calls he could not answer, and the paperwork he could not read. He nodded. He said Sergeant Voss's request was acknowledged. He said the range would be open at 1500 hours. He said Corporal Reyes was welcome to demonstrate her proficiency if she chose to. And then he moved on to the next rank without looking at her again. Voss's grin, which had been small and polite during his request, widened by exactly 2 degrees. He said yes, sir, snapped another salute, and stepped back into formation. His corporals, standing behind him, could not entirely hide their smiles. The assembly continued for another 11 minutes. Reyes did not move. She stood at parade rest with her eyes on the horizon and her hands crossed behind her back exactly as she had been standing at the start. And when the formation was dismissed and the ranks broke and the noise of 300 people scattering to their duty stations filled the yard, she turned on her heel, walked back to her barracks, and disappeared inside without exchanging a single word with a single person. Master Chief Delacroix watched her go. He did not follow her. He walked, instead, to Commander Harlan's office, and he asked for a private word. Harlan looked up from his desk with a face that had already anticipated the visit and did not look pleased about it. Delacroix closed the door. He stood in front of the desk. And what he said next, in a voice so low that Harlan had to lean forward to hear him, was that if the commander went through with the range demonstration that afternoon, he was going to owe an apology to a corporal in his command by the end of the day that no amount of paperwork was going to fix. Harlan asked him what he meant. Delacroix said nothing for a moment. Then he simply said, "Sir, you do not want to see what she can do. You want to see what she does not do, because everything she does not do is on purpose." And with that, he stepped back, saluted, and walked out. Nobody on the base could quite explain, later, what changed in the 2 hours before 1500. But something changed. It started with a whisper in the mess hall around lunchtime, a rumor that Master Chief Delacroix had been seen going into the commander's office and coming out with his jaw set in a way none of the SEAL detachment operators had ever seen. Then, at around 1330, a Ranger Corporal noticed that the entire SEAL detachment, all 19 of them, in full combat kit and with their weapons, had moved to the western observation platform above the range. They were not talking. They were not lounging. They were standing in a loose, staggered line along the platform railing, and every one of them had their eyes on the small barracks door where Corporal Reyes had disappeared that morning. That, more than anything else, was the first crack in the certainty of everyone on that base. Because SEAL operators do not stand in loose, staggered lines watching a barracks door for fun. They do it when they are about to see something they want to remember. Sergeant Voss walked past the platform on his way to the range at 1445. He looked up. He saw the operators. He saw the Master Chief at the center of the line, arms folded, face unreadable. And for the first time in his career, Sergeant Voss felt a small, cold, uncertain tightening in the middle of his chest. He kept walking. He told himself he had imagined it. He arrived at the range, checked in with the range officer, set up his own rifle at the 200-meter lane, and waited. His 3 corporals arrived a few minutes later, laughing, ready for the show. They set up in the adjacent lanes. They checked their scopes. They chambered rounds. And they waited. At 1458, the barracks door opened, and Corporal Reyes stepped out into the afternoon sun. She was wearing her full uniform. Her plate carrier was locked down tight. Her tactical cap was pulled low. Her neck gaiter was in place. She was carrying, over her right shoulder, a rifle case that nobody on the base had seen her open before. It was not the standard issue case. It was matte black, hard-sided, with 2 combination locks and a small, unmarked plate on the side. She walked across the yard with her usual, slow, deliberate stride. She did not look at the SEAL detachment on the platform. She did not look at Sergeant Voss waiting at his lane. She walked to the far end of the range, to the lane furthest from the tower, set the case down on the shooting mat, knelt beside it, and began the ritual of unlocking it. The clicks of the combination locks were the loudest sound on the range for a full 30 seconds. And then she opened the case. What was inside made 3 of the 4 range personnel take an involuntary step forward. Master Chief Delacroix, on the platform above, did not move. He had known what was inside the case since the day she had arrived. And that was the moment, that specific second, at exactly 1500 hours on the 9th day since Corporal Reyes had walked onto that base, when Sergeant Voss began, slowly, to understand that he had made a mistake he could not take back. The rifle she lifted out of the case was a match-grade custom build that nobody in the current active service would ever be issued through normal supply channels. The stock was hand-carbon-laid, matte gray, with a serial number sanded off. The scope on top of it was a piece of glass that 3 of the SEAL operators on the platform recognized instantly, because they had each written formal requisitions for one and been denied by budget review. The barrel was longer than standard. The bipod was custom-milled. And when she set it down onto the shooting mat and began her pre-fire ritual, every single movement was so economical and so practiced that it looked less like a soldier preparing to shoot and more like a surgeon preparing for an operation she had performed 1,000 times before. Sergeant Voss, in his own lane 40 feet to her left, cleared his throat. He said, loudly, that the standard qualification was 5 rounds at 200 meters, 10 rounds at 400, 5 rounds at 600. Standard M40 course of fire. He said it with the same smile he had been carrying all morning. Reyes did not respond. She was checking the wind flag at the far end of the range. She was reading the ripple pattern in the yellow desert grass beyond the berm. She was doing math in her head that Voss could not have followed even if she had spoken it out loud. Master Chief Delacroix, on the platform, murmured something to the operator next to him. That operator murmured something back. And a slow, quiet, almost invisible ripple moved down the line of 19 men on the platform, each of them adjusting their stance by a fraction of an inch, each of them squaring themselves slightly toward the range. Down at the shooting mat, Reyes was ready. She looked up, and for the first time all week, she spoke. Her voice was quiet, level, without any inflection at all. She said she would take Sergeant Voss's course of fire under one condition. Voss laughed. He asked what the condition was. She said the condition was that she would fire from the 1500-meter mark, not the 200, 400, or 600. She would take all 20 rounds at that single distance. And she would fire them at the standard M40 course of fire targets that were already downrange at those closer distances. Voss stopped laughing. Behind him, the range officer looked up sharply from his clipboard. 1500 meters. At targets sized for 200, 400, and 600. That was not a demonstration. That was not a qualification. That was, in the polite parlance of range officers everywhere, a suicide-level flex. The wind was moving. The distance was more than double the maximum listed on the standard course of fire. The targets at 200 meters would appear, from 1500 meters, as pinpricks of paper the size of a fingernail. The math on the shot was so ugly that most sniper instructors would refuse to teach it as an exercise, because the failure rate was too high to be instructionally useful. Voss looked at the range officer. The range officer looked at Commander Harlan, who had just arrived and was standing at the back of the tower with his arms folded across his chest. Harlan looked at Master Chief Delacroix on the platform. And Delacroix, without breaking his gaze from Reyes down at the mat, gave a single small nod. Harlan swallowed. He turned to the range officer. He said, in a voice that was carefully controlled, that Corporal Reyes's proposed course of fire was approved. The range officer wrote it down on his clipboard with a hand that had developed a small tremor. Voss, in his lane, was no longer smiling. He looked at Reyes. He looked at the 1500-meter line, painted in faded white on the far end of the range and hardly ever used. He looked at the small paper targets 3/4 of a mile away that were about to become the targets of a shot nobody had ever asked to see. And in a voice that came out smaller than he intended, he said, "Fine." He said, "Fine, let's see it." She was already picking up her rifle. She walked to the 1500-meter marker without hurry. The mat came with her. The rifle came with her. She set both down at the line, dropped into a low prone position, and disappeared behind the rifle until all that was visible of her was the top of her tactical cap, the black barrel of the weapon, and the 2 small points where her elbows anchored into the dirt. The wind flag at the far berm was showing a 9 o'clock wind at approximately 12 knots, gusting to 15. The sun was 3/4 of the way through its afternoon arc, low enough that the mirage was heavy on the ground, but high enough that the light was still bright. Every sniper on the SEAL platform was doing his own math in his head as she settled. Every one of them was arriving at the same conclusion, which was that even for them, this shot was on the edge of the achievable. A single round for the first target, at 200 meters, would need a hold that most of them would call a guess. She took her time. She was not rushing. Her breathing was so slow that from the tower, it looked like she was not breathing at all. And then, the first round left the barrel. The sound of it reached the tower a beat after they saw the muzzle jump. Down at the 200-meter target, the small paper silhouette developed a hole so precisely centered that the range officer, watching through the tower spotting scope, involuntarily said, "God." She did not lift her head. She cycled the bolt. She adjusted for the next target, which was a smaller silhouette at 400. She fired. The 400-meter target got a hole in the throat. She cycled. She fired. 200, throat. She cycled. She fired. 400, chest. She cycled. She fired. 600 meters, a silhouette barely larger than a playing card from her prone position, center chest. She was moving through the sequence with the same rhythm she had used to peel potatoes in the kitchen 4 days earlier. Slow, deliberate, without waste. Sergeant Voss, in his own lane, had not fired a single one of his own rounds yet. He had forgotten to. He was staring downrange with his mouth slightly open, and the tower spotting scope was reporting each impact with the same words over and over. Hit, 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 hit. She fired her 10th round. 10 hits. Center mass on every silhouette, at every distance, from a distance more than double the maximum of the course of fire, with a rifle nobody had scored and a scope nobody had inspected. She paused for approximately 3 seconds. Then she began the second half. Round 11, 200, forehead. Round 12, 400, forehead. Round 13, 600, forehead. Round 14, 200, forehead. She was not just hitting the targets anymore. She was choosing where on the targets she wanted the holes to be. And she was placing them so precisely that a spotter 15 feet away from the target line, if there had been one, could have used the pattern of impacts to draw the outline of a face. Voss let out a small sound. It was not a word. It was more like an involuntary exhale. His corporals in the adjacent lanes had lowered their own rifles. They were staring downrange. The SEAL platform above the range was completely silent. Master Chief Delacroix's arms had come uncrossed. His hands were resting at his sides. His face, which for 4 days had been unreadable, had softened into something that might, in another man, have been called pride. Round 20 was the last one. She took a longer beat before it. She adjusted her cheek weld by perhaps 3 millimeters. She let the breath out. She fired. Downrange, at 600 meters, the tiny paper silhouette developed a hole in the exact center of the small painted diamond the range officer used to mark the 10 ring. The range officer stared through the scope for a long moment. Then he lowered it. Then he lowered it further, until it was resting flat on the desk of the tower, and he took his cap off, and he did not say anything for a full 10 seconds. Down at the 1,500-meter line, Corporal Reyes cleared her weapon. She removed the magazine. She locked the bolt back. She picked up her 20 spent casings, one at a time, and dropped them into a small mesh bag on her belt. She stood up. She dusted the front of her uniform once with the flat of her gloved hand. She walked back to the shooting mat. She began, without hurry, to break the rifle down and return it to the matte black case. She had not spoken a word since the moment she had proposed the range. She did not speak now. And on the platform above the range, Master Chief Delacroix turned to the SEAL operator next to him and said one word, quietly, but loud enough that 3 or 4 of them heard it, and passed it down the line so that within seconds, every one of the 19 men on that platform was thinking the same word, and behind them, without any of them saying it aloud, so were the range officer, the commander, and every soldier who had drifted to the fence to watch. The word was Nighthawk. For a long moment after she stood up, nothing on that base moved. The wind was still blowing. The flag on the pole was still snapping. Somewhere in the distance, a diesel generator was running. But every single person within eyeshot of that range had gone completely still. Sergeant Voss was the first to break. He walked, slowly, from his own lane down toward the 1,500-meter line where she was closing her rifle case. He was not smiling anymore. His 3 corporals did not follow him. They were still standing at their lanes, staring downrange at targets they could not have hit with a howitzer, and one of them, the youngest, was blinking rapidly like he was trying to unsee what he had just seen. Voss reached the mat. He stopped about 10 feet from her. He opened his mouth. He closed it. He opened it again. He did not know what he had come down there to say. He had thought, walking down, that he was going to say something like fair enough, or good shooting, or nice performance. But standing in front of her now, watching her calmly click the second combination lock on her rifle case, all of those phrases felt like small, useless things that did not belong in his mouth. She looked up at him. Her eyes met his for the first time all week. And for exactly the length of a heartbeat, Sergeant Voss saw, behind those steel-gray eyes, something that was so far outside of anything in his own experience that his body took an involuntary step backward. She stood up. She lifted the case. She walked past him without a word. She walked past his silent corporals. She walked past Commander Harlan, who was standing at the front of the tower with his own arms lowered and his own face pale, and she gave him the small, precise nod that a subordinate gives a superior when leaving a formation. Harlan returned the nod without speaking, and then she walked, at the same slow, deliberate pace she had used all week, back to the barracks. The barracks door closed behind her. On the platform above the range, Master Chief Delacroix turned to the SEAL operator to his right and said, in a voice barely above a murmur, that was 90%. She was pulling every shot by half a mil to the left on purpose. She did not want to embarrass anyone. The operator he had spoken to looked at him. Then he looked back down at the range. Then he said, very quietly, Master Chief, with respect. She embarrassed everyone. And every man on that platform, all 19 of them, made a small sound that in another situation might have been a laugh. But it was not a laugh. It was the sound of a group of professionals who had just watched something they were going to talk about for the rest of their lives. Now let me ask you something, and I want you to actually pause the video and answer this in the comments below, because I read every one. Pause the video for just a second and tell me in the comments. If you were in her boots, outnumbered 30-1, with the commander who mocked you now bleeding at your feet, would you take the shot? Or would you let him watch you walk away? Because that moment on the range, that specific second when Voss took that half step backward and every one of those SEAL operators went silent on that platform, was not the end of Nighthawk's story. It was, and I promise you this, only the very beginning of it. 3 days after the range demonstration, everything changed. The base radio traffic at 0400 on a Tuesday morning started with a garbled distress call from a convoy that had been moving supplies through the Eastern Pass and had, per the last transmission, taken small arms fire from the ridgeline. The transmission cut out. Command tried to re-establish. They could not. Then the second convoy, moving parallel through the southern route, reported the same thing, only worse. Coordinated fire from multiple elevated positions and casualties already. Then a third radio silence. This one from a forward observation post that had been quiet for the entire deployment, went dead in the middle of a sentence. Commander Harlan was in the operations center within 90 seconds of the first call, still buttoning the collar of his uniform. Master Chief Delacroix was there before him, already on the secure line, already speaking in the clipped short bursts that operators use when they are trying not to communicate anything an enemy could exploit if the frequency were compromised. Sergeant Voss was called in 15 minutes later. He arrived in his gear, still zipping his plate carrier, and the first thing he saw when he walked into the operations center was the tactical display showing 3 simultaneous hostile contacts across an arc of nearly 70 kilometers, with the easternmost one, the convoy that had gone dark first, sitting on a ridgeline that his mind, doing rapid stress math, told him was approximately 3,000 meters from the nearest cover a friendly asset could reach. 3,000 meters. Voss's stomach tightened. He said, out loud, without meaning to, we need a marksman. Delacroix looked up from the secure line. He said, we do. And then he said, we have one. And Voss, who 3 days earlier had stood on a firing range mocking a woman for her torn jacket and her quiet mouth, felt the blood drain out of his face. 10 minutes later, Corporal Reyes was standing in the operations center in full kit, her rifle case at her feet, her tactical cap pulled low, her neck gaiter up. She was reading the tactical display. She was doing math. She was asking, in the same quiet level voice she had used on the range, questions that made the operations officer scramble to answer them. Distance to nearest overwatch position. Wind data for the eastern pass. Elevation delta between the ridge and the valley floor. Enemy composition estimates. She listened to each answer. She nodded once. She unfolded a paper topographic map on the ops table and studied it for exactly 40 seconds. Then she pointed to a small, unlabeled promontory approximately 2,700 meters southwest of the compromised convoy and said, "Here. Insert me here. I will need 6 hours. Do not send extraction until I signal." Harlan looked at the map. He looked at Delacroix. Delacroix, without any expression on his face at all, said, "Send her." And Harlan, who 12 days earlier had put a folder in his bottom drawer and told himself he would never open it, said, "Get her in the air." The Black Hawk lifted off the pad at 0512. Reyes was the only passenger. She sat with her rifle case across her knees, her eyes closed, her breathing so slow and so even that the crew chief, watching her from the door gunner's position, thought at one point she might be asleep. She was not asleep. She was, as she had been every moment on the base, doing math. Share this with the woman in your life who was ever told she wasn't enough. She needs to hear this before the week ends. The helicopter dropped her at a landing zone 1.1 kilometers from her chosen promontory. She hiked the remaining distance in 42 minutes, moving through terrain that would have taken most operators twice that. When she reached her chosen position, she went prone behind a rock spine, cleared a small line of fire through the brush with the flat of her hand, and set up. It was 0611. The sun was just beginning to cut over the eastern ridge. In her scope, at a range her onboard computer read as 2,704 meters, she could see the convoy she had come to save. She could see the 3 armored vehicles, 2 of them still smoking. She could see the 15 surviving soldiers who had taken cover in a shallow dry wash beside the road and were, at that moment, pinned down by fire from at least 8 enemy positions on the ridgeline above them. She could see, through the shimmer of the desert mirage, exactly where each of those 8 enemy positions was. She began, slowly, to count them. The first shot was easier than the range had been, because the target was moving, and moving targets, for reasons that only other snipers understand, sometimes betray themselves in ways that stationary ones do not. She took the leader first. He was standing behind the second highest rock on the eastern ridge, giving hand signals to the men below him, and he had, in the way that overconfident commanders sometimes do, stepped 1 inch too far from his cover to gesture. Her round crossed 2,700 meters in slightly less than 4 seconds. He was on the ground before any of his men understood what had happened. She was already cycling. Her second shot took the machine gunner who had been suppressing the wash. Her third took the man who tried to move to the machine gun. Her fourth took the spotter who was trying to figure out where the shots were coming from. Down in the wash, the surviving convoy soldiers began, slowly, to understand that the pressure on them had lifted. One of them lifted his head. Then another. The sergeant leading the survivors, a Marine gunnery sergeant named Ellis, who would later spend 2 hours in a debriefing room trying to describe what he had just witnessed, realized that his radio was working again. He called it in. He said, "Into the radio, we have an angel." That was the exact phrase. "We have an angel." And in the operations center back at the base, Master Chief Delacroix closed his eyes for just a second when he heard it. She took her 5th round. She took her 6th. She took her 7th. But somewhere between the 7th and the 8th, one of the surviving enemy fighters, a man who had been smart enough to realize that the shots were coming from the southwest and stupid enough to think he could do something about it, managed to launch a single rocket-propelled grenade in her general direction. It did not hit her. It hit the rock spine 40 feet to her left. The shrapnel that came off the rock, however, hit her. A piece of granite the size of a coin cut into the back of her right shoulder, just above the top edge of her plate carrier, and lodged there. She did not react. She did not roll away. She did not stop shooting. She cycled her bolt. She adjusted her hold by the fraction of a click that her body's new asymmetric weight required. She fired her 8th round. She took her 9th. She took her 10th. She was bleeding into the back of her uniform. It was soaking into the collar of her long-sleeve combat shirt and running slowly down her spine under her plate carrier. The pain was there. She had cataloged it. She had decided it was not a priority. The convoy was still in the wash. The 11th position on the ridge had not yet been neutralized. She continued to work. And in that moment, if you had asked any one of the men on that ridge line who was left alive to describe the enemy who was killing them, none of them could have told you. They could not see her. They could not hear the shots. The reports were arriving after the impacts, because the rounds were traveling faster than the sound. They only knew that something invisible, patient, and impossibly precise was picking them off one at a time from a distance they had not thought was possible, and that the wind was carrying the smell of their own blood back into their faces. If you believe stories like hers deserve to be told the right way, quietly tap that subscribe button now, so the next chapter finds you before the algorithm buries it. When the extraction bird landed on the promontory at 1556, the pilot expected to find a dead operator or a critically wounded one. He had been briefed on the injuries reported by the convoy survivors: a female sniper, taking shrapnel to the shoulder, still active on the net, still calling adjustments. What he found instead was Corporal Reyes sitting cross-legged on the rock beside her folded rifle case, her plate carrier off, her long-sleeve combat shirt pulled up on one side so she could apply a compression bandage to the wound with her left hand, and a small, empty ration wrapper folded neatly in her lap. She had not needed to be extracted, technically. She was walking. She had, according to the mission log later reconstructed by intelligence, neutralized 14 enemy combatants across a 5-hour engagement, called in coordinates that led to the recovery of 41 surviving convoy personnel across 3 separate contact points. And this was the part the debriefers had the hardest time understanding. Refused to fire on 3 enemy fighters who had at various points during the engagement been in her scope, but had, in her judgment, been in the process of retreating rather than fighting. She had let them go. She said, in the debriefing, that they were not threats anymore, and that she was not there to hunt. She was there to protect the convoy. When the extraction bird lifted off the promontory, Reyes was staring out the door at the receding ridgeline. She was still bleeding, but slowly now. The crew chief tried to talk to her. She did not respond. She was, again, doing math. At the base, when she stepped off the helicopter, the entire tarmac was lined with personnel. Not for a ceremony. Nobody had ordered a formation. They had simply, in the way that a base sometimes does when it learns something important at once, drifted out of their duty stations and formed a rough perimeter along the tarmac's edge. The SEAL detachment was there in full. Master Chief Delacroix stood at the front of them. The Ranger element was behind them. The Marines were opposite. The Air Force ground crew was near the hangar. And at the far end, standing alone with his cap in his hand, was Commander Harlan. She walked off the ramp. She walked past the Rangers. She walked past the Marines. She stopped in front of Master Chief Delacroix and gave him the small, precise nod she had given Harlan at the range. He returned it, and then, very slowly, he saluted her. She returned the salute. And then, one by one, every man on that tarmac saluted her. She did not stop to acknowledge each one. She walked, with her rifle case slung over her uninjured shoulder and the compression bandage still tight against her right side, past the entire assembly, and up to where Commander Harlan was standing. She stopped in front of him. She did not salute him. She waited. And Harlan, who had put a folder in his desk drawer and then unlocked that drawer 3 days earlier and read it start to finish, did something that no one on that base had ever seen him do before. He apologized. He said her name, her real name, the one that was not on any roster, and he apologized to her. He said he should have believed the folder. He said he should have known better than to let a sergeant with a small grievance turn her into a spectacle on a firing range. He said, with a small crack in his voice that was so out of character it startled the executive officer standing behind him, that he was sorry. She looked at him for a long moment. And then she said, in her same quiet level voice, that he was not the first commander to underestimate her, and that he would probably not be the last, but that he was the first one who had apologized for it. She said that made him better than most. And then she said, and this was the part that the base talked about for weeks afterward, that if he really wanted to make it right, he could make sure Sergeant Voss was on the flight roster for the next high-risk Overwatch mission, because she was going to need a spotter, and she wanted the spotter to be someone who had learned something. Harlan nodded once. He said, "Yes, ma'am," and she gave him the same small nod she had given Delacroix, and she walked past him toward the medical bay to finally have the granite chip removed from her shoulder. And if this is the kind of story you'd want your sister, your daughter, or your mother to hear, hit subscribe. That single tap is what keeps these hidden histories from disappearing. The moon over the base that night was very bright, and the desert was very quiet. Corporal Reyes was standing on the roof of her barracks with her rifle case at her feet and a coffee in her hand. The wound in her shoulder had been cleaned, stitched, and dressed. She would be on light duty for approximately 72 hours. She was not thinking about the wound. She was not thinking about the shot. She was not, in truth, thinking about anything in a way that a normal person would recognize as thinking. She was watching the horizon. She was letting the wind move across her face and cool the back of her neck. She was listening to the small metallic clicks of the base's chain-link perimeter fence flexing in the breeze. She had done this on rooftops in 6 countries. She would do it on rooftops and more. It was not celebration. It was not reflection. It was, if it was anything, the small quiet moment that every operator carries between the mission that just finished and the one that has not yet been assigned. It is the moment where you remind yourself that you are still a person, that you still have hands and lungs and a small quiet mouth that has not yet said everything it wants to say, and that the world is still turning underneath your boots even when you have spent the day trying to make sure it keeps turning for someone else. Down in the yard, 3 of the SEAL detachment operators were sitting around a small folding table with a bottle between them and their voices low. They were talking about her. She could hear pieces of the conversation drifting up. She was not eavesdropping. She was, in the way she was trained to, simply aware. One of them was saying that in his 22 years of service, he had never seen a shot like the first one she took at 2700. One of the others was saying he would follow her into any building in any country. The third was quiet. He was the one who had once, long ago, taught a young female recruit in a training program that officially did not exist how to breathe through a scope. He had not seen her in 6 years. He had not been sure it was her until the range demonstration. He was now sure. She sipped her coffee. She let the moon move slowly across the sky above her. And somewhere, on another base in another country, in a room she did not know about yet, a briefing was being written that would put her name, her real name, the one not on any roster, at the top of the next assignment sheet. She did not know it was being written, but when the call came, in 72 hours, she would be ready. She would always be ready. That was the only thing she had ever really been. Before you scroll, drop one word in the comments. Honor if she deserved every ounce of what she took back, or mercy if you would have let them live. I read every single one. And listen, if you believe stories like hers deserve to be told the right way, quietly tap that subscribe button now, so the next chapter finds you before the algorithm buries it. Because there is a version of this story that ended much worse. There is a version where Sergeant Voss's little firing range demonstration turned into a career-ending humiliation for a woman who had done nothing to deserve it. There is a version where Commander Harlan never opened that folder, never learned who Nighthawk really was, never got to apologize on the tarmac in front of his entire base. And there is a version, and this is the version that keeps operators like Master Chief Delacroix awake at night, where the convoy in the Eastern Pass got no angel at all, and 41 families got a knock at the door the next morning. This version did not end that way. This version ended with a quiet woman standing on a rooftop under a bright desert moon, watching the horizon, waiting for the next call. That is the ending she got. She earned it. And she is not done. But this, everything you just heard, this was only the beginning. Because 2 weeks later, in a base 3,000 miles away, Nighthawk walked into a briefing room carrying a rifle no one recognized. And what she did next made every general in that room stand up. That story is next, and it is waiting for you now. There are people who will tell you that stories like this are exaggerated, that the details get sharpened in the retelling, that the distances get longer and the odds get worse each time the story crosses another mess hall. I understand the skepticism. I have felt it myself sitting across from operators who tell me things over a cup of coffee that would sound absurd if they came from anyone else. But I have also seen the after-action reports. I have seen the sad imagery. I have seen the debriefing transcripts. And in the case of Nighthawk, the strange and uncomfortable truth is that the versions of the story that circulate on bases and in bar corners are usually the softer versions. The real numbers are worse. The real distances are longer. The real cost, to her, personally, over the years, is a weight that most of us would not be able to carry for a single afternoon. She carries it every day. She has been carrying it since she was 19 years old. Something else you should understand. because it matters for everything that comes next. Nighthawk did not choose the call sign. It was given to her in a training program whose entire existence is still officially denied by an instructor who took one look at her the first time she went prone with a rifle and said, out loud, that she moved less than any recruit he had ever seen. Less breath, less hesitation, less waste. He said that watching her set up was like watching a bird of prey settle onto a branch. No visible motion, and then suddenly a stillness so total that the branch itself seemed to have stopped moving. That instructor is now retired. He lives in a small house in the mountains of a state he asked me not to name. He does not talk about the program. He does not talk about her. But when I sat across from him last winter and mentioned the call sign, he closed his eyes for a long moment and did not open them again for almost a full minute. When he did, he said only, yes, that was her. And then he changed the subject. There is a photograph, one photograph, that exists somewhere in a folder in a locked room in a building in Virginia that most Americans will never enter and never learn the name of. The photograph shows her at 21 years old, in the desert, kneeling beside a rifle, her tactical cap pulled low, her neck gaiter up, her steel gray eyes looking directly into the lens without any expression at all. Behind her, out of focus, is a horizon line and a small dark shape that might be a vehicle or might be a body. The photograph is not classified. It is worse than classified. It has been placed inside a folder that has no classification stamp on it, because the classification stamp itself would confirm that the photograph exists, and the people who have placed it in that folder have decided that even the confirmation of its existence is a risk they are not willing to accept. I have not seen the photograph. Nobody I know has seen it. But 3 separate former officers have, at different times and in different rooms, told me the same detail about it, that in the corner of the image, just barely visible, is a small red and blue patch on the sleeve of her uniform that has since been retired from every branch of the United States military. Retired because the unit it represented no longer exists. Retired because everyone who wore that patch is either dead or has been asked, very politely, to stop mentioning it. She still wears it, though? Not in public. Not on any assignment where anyone will see. But on the inside of her plate carrier, on a small square of fabric that only she ever sees when she is putting the vest on and taking it off, she keeps a replica of that patch, hand-stitched by an old friend, kept in the exact place where the original one used to sit. That is the kind of person she is. I want to take you back to the base for a moment, because there is one detail from the days after the tarmac scene that I have never quite been able to get out of my head. It concerns Sergeant Voss. In the weeks that followed the convoy mission, the mission he had, indirectly and unknowingly, made possible by forcing Nighthawk to reveal a fraction of what she was capable of on a range in front of an entire base, Voss changed. He did not become humble in the theatrical way that some people become humble after a public reckoning. He did not, for instance, walk up to Nighthawk in the mess hall and try to apologize. He never spoke to her again, in fact. But something in the way he carried himself around the base shifted, and the other soldiers noticed. He stopped assigning her petty details. He stopped assigning anyone petty details. He began, on his own initiative, to spend an extra hour on the range each evening after his shift, working on shots from unusual distances with rifles he had not previously bothered to master. He began reading books on ballistics that he would not have picked up before, and in a small, quiet way that nobody on that base ever remarked on out loud, he became a better sergeant. That was the effect she had on people. She did not humiliate them. She did not lecture them. She simply, by existing, made them want to be better than they were. And the ones who could not stand that pressure, the ones who could not tolerate the reflection of themselves that they saw when she looked at them without saying anything, those people usually asked to be transferred within a few months of her arrival. Voss did not ask to be transferred. Voss stayed. And 2 rotations later, when Nighthawk requested him as a spotter on an assignment that took the 2 of them to a piece of terrain neither of them will ever be allowed to describe in detail, he became, for the first time in his career, the second-best sniper in a 2-person team. He said, in his own after-action report, that it was the best 2 weeks of his life. Every time I tell one of these stories, I get letters. I get letters from women who served, and from women who tried to serve and were pushed out, and from men who served alongside women who were quiet and lethal and disrespected and who never got the recognition they were owed. I get letters from grandmothers who were nurses in wars that most of us have already forgotten, and from mothers whose daughters came home from tours and never quite came all the way home. I read them all. I answer as many as I can. And the thing that comes through in almost every single one of them is a small, patient, terrible loneliness. The loneliness of having been the quietest and best person in a room full of people who could not see you. That loneliness is not a small thing. It is the reason stories like Nighthawks matter. It is the reason we tell them. It is the reason a channel like this exists. And it is the reason you are still watching. Because somewhere in you there is a piece that recognizes the shape of that loneliness even if the specifics of the story are not yours. That recognition is what makes an audience. That recognition is what makes a story worth telling. There are people who will tell you that stories like this are exaggerated, that the details get sharpened in the retelling, that the distances get longer and the odds get worse each time the story crosses another mess hall. I understand the skepticism. I have felt it myself sitting across from operators who tell me things over a cup of coffee that would sound absurd if they came from anyone else. But I have also seen the after-action reports. I have seen the sad imagery. I have seen the debriefing transcripts. And in the case of Nighthawk, the strange and uncomfortable truth is that the versions of the story that circulate on bases and in bar corners are usually the softer versions. The real numbers are worse. The real distances are longer. The real cost, to her, personally, over the years, is a weight that most of us would not be able to carry for a single afternoon. She carries it every day. She has been carrying it since she was 19 years old. Something else you should understand, because it matters for everything that comes next. Nighthawk did not choose the call sign. It was given to her in a training program whose entire existence is still officially denied by an instructor who took one look at her the first time she went prone with a rifle and said, out loud, that she moved less than any recruit he had ever seen. Less breath, less hesitation, less waste. He said that watching her set up was like watching a bird of prey settle onto a branch. No visible motion. And then suddenly a stillness so total that the branch itself seemed to have stopped moving. That instructor is now retired. He lives in a small house in the mountains of a state he asked me not to name. He does not talk about the program. He does not talk about her. But when I sat across from him last winter and mentioned the call sign, he closed his eyes for a long moment and did not open them again for almost a full minute. When he did, he said only, yes, that was her. And then he changed the subject.